Reading from Little House in the Big Woods, and Laura learned all about how they were supposed to behave on Sunday, how to be reverent and quiet and appropriate on Sunday. And so she was going to bed on Sunday. That's where we left off on page 96. Laura began to float away on the music, and then she heard a clattering noise, and there was Ma by the stove getting breakfast. It was Monday morning, and Sunday would not come again for a whole week. That morning when Pa came in to breakfast, he caught Laura and said he must give her a spanking. First he explained that today was her birthday, and that she would not grow properly next year unless she had a spanking. And then he spanked her so gently and carefully that it did not hurt a bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He counted and spanked slowly. 1 spank for each year, and at the last 1 big spank to grow on. Then Pa gave her a little wooden man that he had whittled out of a stick, to be company for Charlotte. Ma gave her 5 little cakes, 1 for each year that Laura had lived with her and Pa, and Mary gave her a new dress for Charlotte. Mary had made the dress herself when Laura thought that she was sewing on her patchwork quilt. And that night, for a special birthday treat, Pa played Pop Goes the Weasel for her. He sat with Laura and Mary close against his knees while he played. Now watch, he said. Watch, and maybe you can see the weasel pop out this time. So that looks like that. I'm sorry, it's kind of blurry. So he's playing the fiddle and they're watching. And then he sang, "A penny for a spool of thread, another for a needle, and that's the way the money goes." Laura and Mary bent close, watching, for they knew now was the time. "Pop," said Pa's finger on the string. "Goes the weasel," sang the fiddle plain as plain. But Laura and Mary hadn't seen Pa's finger make the string pop. "Oh, please, please, do it again," they begged him. Pa's blue eyes laughed, and the fiddle went on while he sang, "All around the cobbler's bench the monkey chased the weasel. The preacher kissed the cobbler's wife. Pop goes the weasel." They hadn't seen Pa's finger that time either. He was so quick that they could never catch him. So they went laughing to bed and lay listening to Pa and the fiddle singing. There's a super racist song that he's going to be singing from the 1800s, and it's very bothersome. And so I am not going to sing it to you because it's like really inappropriate and very uncool. And so we will just end that chapter with them going to bed and singing Pop Goes the Weasel. All right, our next chapter is called Two Big Bears. And if you look really carefully at the picture, we have a bear and we have a tree that looks like a bear if you squint your eyes. It's got 2 ears and a snout, and it looks like it has a paw. All right, this is one of my favorite chapters because I love the little stories within the story. Then one day Pa said that spring was coming. In the big woods the snow was beginning to thaw. Bits of it dropped from the branches of the trees and made little holes in the softening snowbanks below. At noon all the big icicles along the eaves of the little house quivered and sparkled in the sunshine, and drops of water hung trembling at their tips. Pa said he must go to town to trade the furs of the wild animals that he had been trapping all winter. So one evening he made a big bundle of them. There were so many furs that when they were packed tightly and tied together, they made a bundle almost as big as Pa. Very early one morning, Pa strapped the bundle of furs on his shoulders and started to walk to town. There were so many furs to carry that he could not take his gun. Ma was worried, but Pa said that by starting before sunup and walking very fast all day, he could get home again before dark. The nearest town was far away, and Laura and Mary had never seen a town. Can you imagine that? Like you've never seen any other houses other than your house or like your grandma and grandpa's house in the woods. That's it. You've never seen a school, a store. It's pretty amazing to me. Laura and Mary had never seen a town. They had never seen a store. They had never seen even 2 houses standing together. But they knew that in a town there were many houses and a store full of candy and calico, and other wonderful things, powder and shot and salt and store sugar. They knew that Pa would trade his furs to the storekeeper for beautiful things from town, and all day they were expecting the presents he would bring them. When the sun sank low above the treetops and no more drops fell from the tips of the icicles, they began to watch eagerly for Pa. The sun sank out of sight, the woods grew dark, and he did not come. Ma started supper and set the table, but he did not come. It was time to do the chores, and still he had not come. Ma said that Laura might come with her while she milked the cow. Laura could carry the lantern. So Laura put on her coat, and Ma buttoned it up, and Laura put her hands into her red mittens that hung by a red yarn string around her neck, while Ma lighted the candle in the lantern. Laura was proud to be helping Ma with the milking, and she carried the lantern very carefully. Its sides were made of tin with places cut in them for the lantern or the candlelight to shine through. When Laura walked behind Ma on the path to the barn, the little bits of candlelight from the lantern leaped all around her on the snow. The night was not yet quite dark. The woods were dark, but there was a gray light on the snowy path, and in the sky there were a few faint stars. The stars did not look as warm and bright as the little lights that came from the lantern. Laura was surprised to see the dark shape of Suki, the brown cow, standing at the barnyard gate. Ma was surprised too. So in the winter when there's snow on the ground, you usually don't let your cows or your sheep out to graze because they are going to be standing in the snow. So usually all of your animals stay in the barn and you feed them hay or alfalfa, right? You feed them, they don't graze for food. You have to actually feed them all of the hay that you saved from the year before that you put in bales. Ma was surprised too. It was too early in the spring for Suki to be let out in the big woods to eat grass. She lived in the barn, but sometimes on warm days Pa left the door of her stall open so she could come into the barnyard. Now Ma and Laura saw her behind the bars waiting for them. Ma went up to the gate and pushed against it to open it, but it did not open very far because there was Suki standing against it. Ma said, "Suki, get over." She reached across the gate and slapped Suki's shoulder. Just then one of the dancing little bits of light from the lantern jumped between the bars of the gate, and Laura saw long, shaggy black fur and two little glittering eyes. Cows have big, huge eyes, big brown eyes that are like kind of lovey-dovey, and they have short fur, right? Laura saw long, shaggy black fur and two little glittering eyes. Suki had thin, short brown fur. Suki had large, gentle eyes. Ma said, "Laura, walk back to the house." Here's what's happening. Instead of milking the cow, they were about to milk a bear. A big, huge bear. So Laura turned around and began to walk toward the house. Ma came behind her. When they had gone part way, Ma snatched her up, lantern and all, and ran. Ma ran with her into the house and slammed the door, and then Laura said, "Ma, was it a bear?" "Yes, Laura," Ma said. "It was a bear." Laura began to cry. She hung on to Ma and sobbed. "Oh, will he eat Suki?" "No," Ma said, hugging her. "Suki is safe in the barn. Think, Laura, all those big heavy logs in the barn walls, and the door is heavy and solid, made to keep bears out." "No, the bear cannot get in and eat Suki." Laura felt better then. "But he could have hurt us, couldn't he?" she asked. "He didn't hurt us," Ma said. "But you were a good girl, Laura, to do exactly as I told you, and to do it quickly, without asking why." Ma was trembling, and she began to laugh a little. "To think," she said, "I've slapped a bear." Then she put supper on the table for Laura and Mary. Pa had not come yet. He didn't come. Laura and Mary were undressed, and they said their prayers and snuggled into the trundle bed. Ma sat by the lamp mending one of Pa's shirts. The house seemed cold and still and strange without Pa. Laura listened to the wind in the big woods. All around the house the wind went crying as though it were lost in the dark and the cold. The wind sounded frightened. Ma finished mending the shirt. Laura saw her fold it slowly and carefully. She smoothed it with her hand. Then she did a thing that she had never done before. She went to the door and pulled the leather latch string through its hole in the door so that nobody could get in from the outside unless she lifted the latch. She came and took Carrie, all limp and sleeping, out of the big bed. She saw that Laura and Mary were still awake, and she said to them, "Go to sleep, girls. Everything is all right. Pa will be here in the morning." Then she went back to her rocking chair and sat there rocking gently and holding baby Carrie in her arms. She was sitting up late waiting for Pa, and Laura and Mary meant to stay awake too till he came, but at last they went to sleep. And we will stop right there on page 108. So Ma smacks a bear thinking it's their cow. It's totally awesome. All right, we will stop there and then we'll hear the second story. We're going to hear the story within a story about the second bear. Dun dun dun.